So speaking of decision making and good and or bad decision making, so you're living the dream.
Living the dream.
You're up in Fallon. You actually have a house up in the mountains. You're skiing, flying. Everything's good. And then somehow you make a decision that's a little bit off the track a little bit. What was that all about?
I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, I'm in my third year at Top Gun, 2005. I was selected to be the training officer, so I am running Top Gun as the senior IP there, which is just, it's awesome. It is literally, as a Marine, it's a dream job. You could not ask for anything better. I was dating what ended up becoming my wife. So my wife, Whitney, at the time we're dating, she lives out there. We had a place in Tahoe. Drove a Corvette. Life was pretty good, man. Oh, yeah. And I'm actually coming up on my end of service obligation. I can leave the Marine Corps in 2005, and I sort of sold my relationship to Whitney on that idea. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, come put up with this living in Tahoe, but I'm going to get out of the Marine Corps, and don't worry about this. None of it. This is all. It's all coming. Don't even worry about that. Deployments, war, it's over. No, you don't need to worry about that. And so I think I oversold that to her a little bit. Got her to move out to Tahoe. And so there was just a part of me that didn't feel done with the Marine Corps. And ironically, in this amazing experience that I had built up in my mind since I was 16 years old, I'm now a Top Gun instructor. I joined the Marine Corps knowing, because as a fortunate, Top Gun was this big influence. I'm going to leave the Marine Corps as a Top Gun instructor. But I had spent 4 years flying F-18s off carriers, basically in the Navy for all intents and purposes. And I was a Marine in a Marine squadron, but we deployed with Navy carriers, and I spent 3 years in Fallon on a Navy base with a Navy command as one of 3 pilots on the staff at Top Gun. And there was just a part of me that I knew I was going to be done. I was ready to leave the Marine Corps, but I wanted to leave the Marine Corps having fulfilled, I think, that part of being a Marine, a real Marine, is kind of how I felt. And so, again, I had kind of contemplated what I was going to do. You talk to somebody called your monitor. He's the guy that gives you orders. Hey, this is what's next in your career. This is where you're going to go, for how long we think you should do this because it's helpful for whatever. He kind of explains it to you as a guy that basically is responsible for your career progression. And I was kind of going back and forth with, what do I do? Do I stay in? Do I get out? I kind of was struggling with that decision. And he's like, look, we're going to, as a Top Gun instructor, you've got a lot of skill, you got a lot of experience, and they want you to use that and bring it back to the Marine Corps and go to a squadron and teach these guys. So he gave me orders. He says, your orders are going to be to go to Japan. You're going to fly F-18s back to the regular fleet squadron, and you'll go from there. And I think I even got to the point where I had orders given to me. Would
you have been like a squadron commander or a
No,
squadron
I would have
XO?
been like an operations officer or maintenance officer. I was too junior. I'd only been in
it was like 10-year
11-year mark.
Okay.
So I'm kind of up in we call it a department head, where I'm going to run a major department in a squadron. And it was operations or maintenance are kind of the two big ones. And it just didn't. It's not what I wanted to do. I had, like I said, some long-term plans of doing other stuff. I was thinking long-term I was going to get out and go do something else. And so I called the monitor. I said, hey, I want to do a FAC tour. FAC is the forward air controllers, like you described earlier on the podcast. And we had this little list on the internet that was called a hot fill list. It was basically all the jobs that nobody wanted. And if you called, it was a first come, first serve. If you called and volunteered for anything, you were automatically going to get it. And because it was just a list of jobs that they couldn't force on guys for whatever reason. I'm probably not explaining it all that well, but the bottom line is the hot fill bill, it is you call, it's yours for any reason. And I'm like, hey, man, I see there's a hot fill to be a forward air controller in Japan. Because we're going to go to Japan. We kind of crossed that bridge of, okay, we're going to move overseas. We didn't have any kids. It was all good. This is with Whitney. This is with Whitney. Right. She's a little bit not super cool with it, but we found, hey, we'll go to Japan. We'll fly. It'll be fine. And he's like, you're not going to be a forward air controller in Japan. You're going to go fly and whatnot. I said, dude, it's right there in black and white, man. It says hot fill. I'm your guy. And he was like, okay, yeah. And so he gave me these orders, and I wanted to be a FAC because I wanted to leave the Marine Corps having fulfilled all the parts about being a Marine. And in my mind, it's funny because it's like we're opposite on that. The real challenge, or the thing I didn't really want to do but I knew I should, was getting out of the airplane and doing something really hard on the ground. Yeah. Like my natural state in the Marine Corps is in an airplane. And for some people, they're miserable and don't want to do it. For me, that was right. So to do that was, to be a forward air controller was, and it's strange to hear myself say it, I didn't want to go be a forward air controller, but I knew I needed to go do that. I needed to leave the Marine Corps and say, yeah, I did that too. And it was just a matter, I think, of fulfillment of kind of an exclamation point on a career that I always kind of fantasized. And as I learned more about the Marine Corps, there was more to it than just being a pilot.
Right.
So I just wanted that.
So in your mind, were you thinking forward air controller in Japan meant you were going to go over there, have a little team of Marines, you'd go out to the different training ranges, call for some bombs, all good, you go home at night, be with your wife, experience some time in Japan.
Yeah.
Just a nice little, sort of like a long vacation, working a little bit of time on the ground.
I get to go to the field. I'd spend the night in the woods.
Yeah, spend the night in the woods.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Really cool camping. And they pay for it.
Yeah.
So, that's what it was. I was going to go to Japan. There's a bunch of really cool. It was going to be in Okinawa, actually, so not mainland Japan. Okinawa's got great scuba diving, and it's kind of neat. And I could bring my wife with me. It was going to be a lot of fun, and I can train. I was going to teach guys how to use airplanes to drop bombs. I knew how to do that. It was going to be a really cool thing. So I get these orders, and my wife and I moved out to Japan. We got there and to Okinawa, a place called Camp Hansen, a little base up there in the middle of the island, and I'm there probably. Dude, I'm probably there a week, and my boss, the brigade platoon commander, is like, "Hey, we're gonna send a brigade platoon, which is probably 50 guys. I'm guessing at the numbers, to Camp Lejeune, because that Anglico just came back from 7 months in Iraq, and they need to go right back and very quick turnaround. They don't have enough qualified guys." And so, I'm there a week, and I'm coming home and tell Whitney, like, "Hey, here's the deal. They need guys to go out to Lejeune to do this deployment to Iraq, and I'm going to be one of those guys." So we were there, instead of a year, we were there for maybe...
She's like, "Is there snorkeling
in
Iraq?
Yeah.
Because you were telling me about scuba diving."
So we crammed a year's worth of stuff in about 6 weeks, because it was probably maybe early November when the word kind of came down, and we knew we had till the end of the calendar year. So we shoved a year's worth of living in Japan in about 6 weeks. And we did Korea, we did Thailand, we did mainland, did Tokyo, we got our dive qual. We did it all. Only December 22nd or whatever it was, we flew home, and I went straight to Lejeune from there to start training with 2nd Anglico, which was the team that had just come back from Iraq after their 7-month deployment on a very quick turn. They were probably 4 months into their turnaround cycle.
So you get, just real quick for people that don't know what Anglico is.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
The Anglico stands for Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company, and really what it is it's a group of small teams, 4 or 5 man teams called firepower control teams. And what those teams were all supposed to be able to do is control airplanes, tell airplanes what to do with their bombs. We could control artillery, so how to fire artillery ordnance. And even, we didn't do it there in Iraq, but we could use naval gunfire, so guns off ships. We were training all 3 of those skill sets. And the whole point of an Anglico in a place like Iraq is you had different units. You had Navy units, Army units, Marine Corps units, and as an Anglico, you're a liaison. So that's what the L in Anglico is. So I was trained to go to an Army unit and know how Army does. People may not know this. All the services actually do the same job differently. So the Army and the Marine Corps will get the same mission and have a totally different way of doing it because their doctrine and their training is different. Now, it's similar, but there's a bunch of pretty critical differences in there. And so what we were training to do is we had all Marine airplanes in where we were in Iraq and all Army land forces. And so the Army doesn't have any training on how to use Marine Corps airplanes. Marine Corps doesn't have a lot of training to use Army ground forces. And so when those two people connect, there's a problem with how they communicate and what they want from each other. Insert Anglico. We're the liaison between the Army ground units and, in this case, the Marine Corps air units. So my job was to control Marine airplanes to support the Army on the ground. And that was all over Iraq. And what the Anglico team would take this whole group and break it into maybe 25 4-man teams and went all over the country to go do this same mission with a whole bunch of different units. And so that was our mission as a forward air controller. And I was qualified as a forward air controller because I had flown airplanes, dropped bombs in combat, understood how F-18s were supposed to support ground maneuver, and I went to school, a forward air controller school. So let's go to Japan. It'll be fun. We'll pretend to do that for a year. And then we end up in Camp Lejeune training to go to Iraq.
And now it's your first time kind of doing grunt work, right?
So last time I had held a rifle, shot a rifle, and worn a pair of combat boots was the basic school. So I had, I got my air slot at TBS. That was a big day for me. I'd done 6 months of that. I had that check in the block. I was feeling pretty good about that. And I had I don't think I put on my camouflage uniform. I think I wore a flight suit. Honestly, I think every day for 7 years. I could probably count on one hand. Well, even longer than that, I wasn't even counting flight school. I could probably count on one hand the number of days that I didn't wear a flight suit from the time that I selected to go to flight school to the time that I ended up in Anglico. Days. I mean, so this was a foreign. Now, I was a Marine. I went to the basic school. It was all back there somewhere. But, I think there is this, and I've mentioned this, I think, to you. I think it's just sort of this habit of self-sabotage. Like, well, I can't leave the Marine Corps without being a real Marine. So I'm going to literally sabotage myself by volunteering for a job that I don't know if I really want to do, but now I'm stuck doing it. So I'm going to have to do that so I won't ever have to say I didn't do that. So this kind of cycle of breaking promises to my wife, volunteering for stuff I didn't really want to do but knew that I should, and next thing you know, it all blew up in my face because let's go to Japan. Japan's awesome. Good sushi and great experience there, and it's going to be awesome, and I will be a FAC, and I can for the rest of my life say, oh, I was a real Marine. I was a FAC, and I did all that. And, it's January in Camp Lejeune.
Be careful what you wish for.
Holy man. So, yeah, make no mistake. I mean, I did that. I volunteered, but I did not at the time when I was trading in my flying orders for these FAC orders. I didn't expect to be in Ramadi. But hey, we need to send a brigade platoon to Camp Lejeune to prep those guys. Of course, yep, I'm going. I mean, I'm not going to not go. That's what we need to do. We're going to go do that. When I got to Camp Lejeune, I ended up being the senior, just by rank, the senior forward air controller in the unit. I was kind of a mid-level major. I'd come from Top Gun. I came straight from Top Gun to that, and I was an experienced guy. And the commanding officer, no joke, I can picture the day. He walks in one day, and he hands me a piece of paper, and it's got like 26 lines on it, one for every team. And on the other sheet was all the locations that we were going to go to. And he's like, fill out where all the teams are going because we got to cover these 15 different locations, 1 to 2 teams per location, and just write the number of the team on there and get this back to me by close of business. Like, roger that, sir. I'd take care of it. And again, my wife loves the story, and I didn't tell her at the time, but my best friend who I grew up with was in Ramadi at the time. He was in 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, who we replaced when we got out there, or did a turnover with. And that's where the war was, man. I mean, in late 2005 and early 2006, the war was in Ramadi. And so I took the pen, I wrote Lightning 6, and so 6-1, 6-2, and 6-3 were all going to Ramadi, and I handed it off to everyone, filled it out, gave it to the CO. And so if you're going to go do something you don't necessarily want to do, but you're going to go do it, you might as well do it. And that's where the war was. I could have gone to a whole host of other places where there's not much going on. It would have been relatively chill. I would have gotten that check in the block for sure. I would have said, yeah, I went to here or there, and no hit on the guys that were in different places. It was just more going on there. And if I wasn't going to go, then somebody else was going to go do that.
Or was Neil? Neil was telling you what was up. He said, "Hey, it's on."
Big time. No, he and I were tight, and we talked as regular as we could, as much as we can say.
Oh yeah,
wasn't
he telling you like, "Oh yeah, I was putting rounds. I was shooting yesterday," and you said, "Well, what were you shooting at?" And he's like, "People."
Yeah, it was such a foreign thing to me as a pilot. Certainly coming from Top Gun. This is my best friend too. In our whole life, we both wanted to be Marine pilots, and we never were in the same unit together. We just couldn't get aligned with that. It never occurred to me when we were kids dreaming about being Marine Corps fighter pilots that the only time we'd ever served together was in Ramadi as forward air controllers. He'll listen to this podcast. He'll get a good chuckle out of this. But so he was there for the 7 months prior. So I think maybe June or July of that year when I was getting ready to get orders, he was on his FAC tour, and he was just a battalion FAC in 3-7, OP 293, OP Huria, OP VA, just doing the deed, man. I mean, getting after it big time. And struggling. There's a lot going on there. And when he would tell me these stories, even someone who had been a Marine for that long, he's like, yeah, we're in a firefight. And I'm like, are you shooting your rifle? He's like, yeah, man. I'm like, at what? It's like the people that are shooting at me. It's you're disconnected, and you don't have this sense of what that means. And so even as I was processing what he was saying and trying to understand, and then saying, this is what I'm going to go do, and kind of volunteering to go do that, I'll be honest with you, there's still a part in retrospect that just didn't really quite fully grasp what that meant. I don't know how anybody on their first deployment to a place like Ramadi goes into that. I dabbled in aviation. Like you said, I'm up in the sky. I mean, it's relatively safe. And I'm sure even the first deployment you did, there's an element of just not being able to fully understand it. And that didn't even become clear to me until right when we're getting ready to leave Ramadi and the new units coming in, and I was explaining what they're about to get into. That's when it really hit me. And I just rewound myself a year earlier. I'm like, I'm that dude that really doesn't know what the hell's about to happen to him and what's about to go on. But it was, like I said, man, and I don't even want to make it sound like that big of a deal, but I volunteered for a FAC tour. They needed guys to go to Lejeune, to go to Iraq. That's where Ramadi was, where the fight was. My best friend was there. I'm going to Ramadi.
Yeah.
And that was about it. It was just, that's what I thought I should do. So I went to Ramadi.
And now you're leading Marines too.
Yeah. And yes. So I explained just a minute ago about those things that make you successful and things that lead to failure are identical. They are. The exact same things in an airplane are the same on the ground. But the environment is different. It is different. There's no way around it. And I also would say, too, that, and for good reason, I think the ground Marines, I worked with a lot of infantry and artillery. Most of Anglica was made up of artillery and some infantry, and obviously there's pilots that are controllers. There's a decent bit of skepticism of pilots coming in to lead these teams. And I think for good reason, because a lot of these guys, when I talk about combat experience,
they're on their third, fourth deployment to Iraq. And
totally, man.
You're coming in.
Yep. They're on they've already done.
You're wearing your Top Gun patch on your shoulder of your camis.
Well, what's worse is I'm not wearing my Top Gun patch. I'm wearing my camis, and they're like, have you ever washed those camis? I'm like, as a matter of fact, I haven't. They are fresh, brand new, and they're wearing their camis from, they did the march up to Baghdad. They went home for 4 months and cycled right back around and did OAF 2. Guys that did Fallujah, and they're back, and they're on their third deployment in 3 years, and they're legit deployments. And Dave Berke, Mr. Top Gun, shows up and is like, hey, where's this brigade platoon? Where's my SALT team? And I think that skepticism of, for good reason, is who is this guy? Yeah. And that was a real leadership challenge for me, is to apply those same things that I knew were effective, but in an environment that I'm totally out of my comfort zone, man. I'm totally out of my comfort zone. And I have to apply a skill set of things that I haven't shot a rifle since 1994. I got to the basic school in October 94. The first thing you do is go to the rifle range. That's the last time I squeezed a trigger on a rifle was October of 1994. And here it is January of 2006, prepping to go to Ramadi, and I got a sight in my M4. So they should be skeptical a little bit, and it was a challenge for me, a real leadership challenge to be successful in a place that I'm not comfortable with. To be honest with you, if you told me I was going to lead a squadron in combat, I'd feel pretty comfortable doing that. I know it'd be a challenge, it'd be hard, but I wouldn't feel like, I don't know about this. I would be all over it. I don't mean to say easy, but right in my wheelhouse. Not true for that. So I worked hard to try to be successful in that, and you got to get your Marines to buy off on your program. Because you're gonna go downtown with those guys. And every relationship with any one of those guys was different, as and you got to build those relationships and demonstrate that this is gonna work.